It is my pleasure to welcome to the program today Jude Munro, the Chair of the Victorian Pride Centre, as well as current Chair of VPA, and of course well known to the sector as a former CEO of Brisbane, Adelaide, Moreland, St Kilda. I'm sure there's more, Jude, but we might stop it there. Well, that's not bad off the top of my head, is it? Nice to see you and welcome.
Lovely to be here, Chris.
Primarily to talk to you about the Victorian Pride Centre, which is a project that's happening in St Kilda that perhaps many of our viewers may not even be aware of. Tell us a bit about the concept, firstly, of the Pride Centre.
I think the concept had its origins within the LGBTIQ community, but also with Roe Allen and the Victorian government. So the concept is to provide a community hub for the lesbian, gay, intersex, bisexual, trans and gender diverse community, and for that community hub to be a really iconic, in an iconic building, to be a safe and welcoming place. And we have a vision for it to be the most well-known and well-loved home for the LGBTIQ community in Australia. Its design, we think, is iconic, and it's planned to be the second largest one in the world.
So is it actually, from what you're saying, they're going to be considered more than just a Victorian centre? Is that right?
In some ways, it'll be a national centre, because it will be home to the Australian Lesbian and Gay Archives, which has an international reputation for its collection. Also, the home for -18 that provides services to young LGBTIQ people. They run formals. I wish they'd been around when I was a kid, but they run formals for teenagers and in Melbourne, in Sydney, and also in Adelaide. And you can see by the nature of the types of organisations that are going to be in the centre, including Joy Radio Station, which is picked up by 75 community radio stations around Australia, and it's digitally known throughout the world. So it has an extensive membership, but also people who listen to its programs through various means. So you can see that there's elements of being a national place.
Yes,
I think when people see the building, it's a pretty extraordinary building.
You mentioned -18. If I'm not remembering this incorrectly, I do recall hearing about some of their work in the youth mental health space in past times too. They do some terrific work, so great to hear that there's a presence there as well. Jude, I recall when I was CEO at Hobson's Bay, there was a process looking for the site for the Pride Centre and asking local government to put its thinking cap on and perhaps bid for a site. So ultimately, tell us about how the current site was chosen.
Yes, there was a process of doing that, Chris. We had an expression of interest that we put out. It would have been in November 2016, so quite a few years ago now, that went out, and it went to councils and universities primarily within an 8-kilometre radius of the CBD. So that was a criterion that was established within the community to say, we want it to be pretty centrally located, easily accessible by public transport, and, to be a safe place. And to that, we had 5 responses, 1 from a university and 4 from 3 inner Melbourne councils. So City of Port Phillip, City of Yarra and City of Melbourne. And the City of Port Phillip's proposal won the day. They put a lot of work into it. They made an offer of amalgamating a site, of buying Monroes Restaurant site, plus putting in a car park that was an adjacent car park to offer a site with basically a 1,650 square metre area facing with a street frontage onto Fitzroy Street, St Kilda, which, as everyone will know, it has been and will continue to be one of Victoria's premier boulevards, really. I mean, it's had a history back, Chris, to the late 1800s when it was the seaside location, and it was also the place where all of the consulates were. We think of, back in those days, St Kilda Road being the home of the consulates, but back in the late 1800s, so was Fitzroy Street, St Kilda. The 2 doors up from the Pride Centre, or 3 doors up, is the French consulate, and it's hidden behind a Greasy Joe's. So it's really got quite the history.
And a great connection too for the location with your own history as a former CEO of St Kilda too, which...
well, that's one part of it, but also the Monroes, you do have the memory, Chris, but the Monroes Restaurant was one of...
I was going to ask about the name, yes.
Yeah, different spelling, but the Monroes Restaurant was the home for transgender people. Used to go there and have meetings there. The Monroes Restaurant proprietor was a wonderfully accepting person, allowed people to come in their civvies, go into the toilets, change, come back out, and meet as people felt comfortable.
Wow.
So and that was back in the 70s. So there's, a really strong history of connection.
You mentioned the design. What's special about the design, do you think?
The design has really some quite remarkable features to it. It's designed by James, really was one of the principal architects, and Grant Amon, who's had also one of the principal architects, but he features in terms of the interior design. But it uses the Moorish design of what you find in Moorish design. So it has a use of the ellipse and the circle in its design, and it's based on such a lovely concept, the beehive and the honeycomb. And so if you cut cylinders on an angle, you get ellipses, and these feature throughout the building. It's a truly beautiful building. So the design is breathtaking. Several of us got quite teary at the board meeting when we first saw the design. And when we came out with the 4 designs that were the top 4 in the national design competition, when people saw this particular design, which ended up being the punter's choice, as well as being the one that the design panel chose, the commentary from some people was, do we really deserve anything that beautiful?
That's terrific.
Well, yes, and it also made some of us think, well, of course, we must have that design.
Yes.
Because it is so beautiful.
Jude, how has COVID-19 impacted on the construction timetable and your plan to eventually open the centre?
It has slowed it a little, but the Victorian government has determined that the building and construction industry should be regarded an essential industry. And so everyone's been working very hard to keep it open. Master Builders Association have worked with the CFMEU, an unusual alliance, but a holy alliance from my perspective, not an unholy alliance. And they've worked really hard to keep construction going. And so we haven't had the delays in building across Australia, really, unlike in some other countries. We've managed to keep building going. So we're very lucky in that sense.
So what is the timeline, do you think, for opening of the centre?
I think it'll have its soft opening in October.
Okay.
So it's getting there. We had what's called topping out a couple of weeks ago, and that was a fantastic day for us. Have you heard the history, Chris, to topping out?
No, I haven't. Please share.
Oh, well, it's a wonderful thing. So what happens now is when any major building is completed, there's a tree that's unveiled at the top of the building. So when the superstructure of the building is completed, and its origins are Nordic, and what happened was a family would meet in front of the forest and they would pray to the forest to give them a big tree that would be sufficient for building their home. And so then they would pick a tree, say the special prayer, and then that tree would be used to build the house. And when the house was completed, a part of the tree that was kept to the side would be put at the top of the house.
I had no idea. Yes, had no idea. I just thought it meant that you'd got to the height of the structure and all the internal work then began.
It means that, but it's also this topping of the building with a sprig or a branch from the tree, and that's turned into this modern building practice.
That's lovely. Jude, sounds terrific. October's not that far away, so it's getting to that exciting time. We'll watch that with great interest. How are you travelling with your very heavy workload at the moment? Chair of the VPA, you're on the Building Recovery Task Force and no doubt doing all this virtually. Have you adapted to the technology seamlessly, do you feel?
Oh, yes, I think I have. I think it's interesting that the evidence that's coming out is that we're actually all more productive. With the Pride Centre, we are conducting our board meetings and committee meetings all online. It's freeing up the staff from commuting time and also board members. And that's the same with all my other boards as well. I've stood back from the Victorian Planning Authority for the duration of being a co-chair on the Building Victoria's Recovery Task Force because I felt it was a conflict. So one of our tasks is recommending long-term planning reform. And naturally enough, that would involve discussion of the Victorian Planning Authority and Planning Panels Victoria and councils and other entities. So it's important to stand back from my role in the VPA for the duration of that work. And that's been all-consuming, really, Chris, over the course of the last couple of months. And Stan Krapan, I know, was speaking to you as one of our co-chairs.
Indeed. Well, all the very best with it. We appreciate your time today. Lovely to see you and hear about progress on the Pride Centre. And we look forward to seeing completion and hopefully opening in October.
And thanks to the Victorian Local Governance Association for your work. And in what's a very difficult time for people in terms of social isolation and the connections that you're making through this initiative. So thank you, Chris, and thanks to the VLGA.
Thank you, Jude. Very nice of you to say. Nice to see you, and we'll see you again soon. We've been speaking with Jude Munro, the chair of the Victorian Pride Centre. Great to hear Jude give us an update on how that project is progressing. If you'd like to tell us about stories that are happening in your world that might turn out to be VLGA Connect episodes of the very near future, we'd love to hear from you. Please send us an email to vlga@vlga.org.au. See you again very soon on another VLGA Connect.